You found Ways We Learn, an investigation of how learning happens across all ages and modalities. Let's go learn something. Hi, and welcome back to Ways We Learn. I'm Sean, and I'm here with Joe, and today we've got another gem of a guest. As an experienced mother of 2 young adults, Sue Groner knows how stressful and overwhelming parenting can be at times. She's founded the Parenting Mentor to provide an ally for parents in their quest to raise confident and resilient children. Sue is the author of Parenting with Sanity and Joy, 101 Simple Strategies, which we'll talk a little bit about today. She's the host of the Parenting Mentor Sessions podcast and is a certified positive discipline parent educator. She's also the creator of the CLEARR method of parenting, developed through years of trial and, as she says, her fair share of errors with her own family. Sue's a graduate of the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and a former advertising executive, and she's a frequent guest expert on major broadcast networks. She also provides advice for many national publications and websites, the Wall Street Journal, Parents, Real Simple, to name a few. And she does speaking engagements and private and group mentorship sessions nationwide for individuals and corporations. So we have a lot to talk about with Sue about how our children learn, and that'll come hand in hand with parents learning as well. So, Sue, welcome to Ways We Learn.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So let's just start with your background and how you got to the place that you wanted to form the Parenting Mentor.
I guess the easiest way to start is to say that I was indeed a stressed out, anxious mom, probably during the middle years. My children are now 23 and almost 26. So this was a while ago. But as they got older and as I started learning more and more, I realized that so much of what I worried about and stressed about was really a waste of my time. And I started to share my thoughts and ideas and strategies with other people. They would come and ask me questions. And my kids are pretty cool kids. And they're like, oh, you're such great kids. What'd you do? Or tell me what's going on. And I would offer up suggestions and say, give me feedback. I'm curious to know. And everyone would come back and say, you were better than our therapist. That was such great advice. You should turn this into a business. And so I did. And I will say, I love what I do. I love having the business, but I also really have found something that is so meaningful to me. And I love making a difference in people's lives. It sounds so Miss America, but it's really great. I love being a parent. I love kids, and I want people to enjoy the process, parents to enjoy the process of being a parent. And the kids obviously benefit significantly as well.
Well, it's great that you found something that you can bring real value in, but that you also love doing. That's wonderful. Why go the route of mentoring then, rather than, say, teaching parents in a more formal setting or counseling or other kinds of feedback? Why mentoring?
First of all, I'm not a counselor. I don't have a degree in early education or child psychology or anything like that. What I talk about is very experiential, and I deal with the everyday stress and anxiety that just comes from being a parent. It's not brain surgery, but sometimes it's really helpful for people who are really in the thick of it to have a sounding board and to have someone say, hey, maybe think of it this way, provide different perspectives and strategies of dealing with one's situation, one's kids, with conflict that are fairly easy to implement and end up making a big difference. And I don't work on a therapy model either, which is like, let's meet every week. And the most amount of appointments that you can book with me is 5. And if you do individual work and we meet 5 times, you should be really set. And I like to space them out as well. It's a lot of information. And I never want a parent to feel overwhelmed. I feel overwhelmed already. So to be able to focus on 1 or 2 things and say, you know what, give this a little time, work through this, see how it goes, then let's talk again. Let's see what we need to tweak. Let's see how it's working. And then we can move on to something else perhaps.
Why do you limit things to 5 sessions?
I can make a change in one session and I can make a ton of changes in five. I want parents to learn to do this stuff on their own. I don't want to be a
Hmm.
crutch. I want the skills and strategies to really be learned so then they can start implementing on their own and figure out how to handle certain situations on their own. Of course, 6 months later, you want to come back and do a refresher or talk about something that you're finding extra challenging, of course.
Hmm.
But I don't want parents to think that this needs to be or should be an ongoing thing.
Well, it seems to parallel what you're trying to do for their children too, right? Which is to
Yeah,
make really
yeah.
resilient kids. You also need to have resilient parents and people who can do this on their own.
Yeah, it's really about learning the skills and the
Mm-hmm.
strategies and getting to the point where you're starting to think that way on your own. A lot of it's about responding instead of reacting.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, as parents, we just react. We're not really thinking about the situation and what's going on with our child and how to best handle it. And that's because we don't have the time to do that. And we
Mm-hmm.
also don't necessarily have the experience. I have the experience now because my kids are older and I've done it so much. And I say I have the benefit of the retroactive crystal ball that I can now look back in
Mm-hmm.
hindsight, of course. But if you could look into a crystal ball and see your kids as young adults and see how well they were doing, you probably would be a little less anxious about some of the things that they're doing now. And
Yeah.
again, a lot of that has to do with the fact that we project what's going on now onto our adult children, onto our children as adults. If they
Mm-hmm.
can't learn to sit nicely at the table at 4 years old, that's going to be a problem. I need to fix this now, or they're never going to be able to sit at the table nicely, which is so untrue. A lot of the time, it's almost like giving parents permission to let go of certain things at a certain point, that things will fall into place nicely, but just gotta kind of work with what you have.
So a lot of this, I think, comes out of the CLEAR method of parenting, which for listeners who can't actually see this on the screen right now, CLEARR, two R's. We'll put a link in the episode notes. But can you just describe this method and how that informs your work?
Yeah, so it stands for communication, love, empathy, awareness, rules, and respect. Each of those quote pillars of this method, and I use the word method lightly because I'm not a fan of parenting methods, so to speak, that it's whenever there's something going on with your child, some sort of conflict, something that they're doing that you don't want them to do, or they're behaving in a way that you don't particularly like, the first thing to do is to think about why they're doing it, right? That's the awareness piece.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, you have a kid who loves being on their screen. It's on their screen a little too much, maybe social media, communicating with their friends, whatever. The awareness piece really is, of course, they want to do it. And how lucky are they that they have this way of communicating as a group or individually whenever they want. When I was growing up, it was a phone. And I couldn't be on the phone for that long because then other people needed the phone. And
Right.
you know what I mean? It's amazing that they can be social, they can hang out. Like kids need connection and want connection. And that's what makes everybody feel good, connection with their friends. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, the first thing is to say, I get how cool this is. It's amazing. And you're lucky that you have that.
Hmm.
The communication is how we talk about this. We talk about it with love. We're coming from a place of love. I always remind parents to think about how they felt when their baby was first born. That unbelievable emotional surge of love, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, as soon as our kids start to realize they have some agency and they start to say no and they start having tantrums, it's like that love piece goes away and we're now
Hmm.
frustrated and angry. And so avoiding that too, like, okay, I'm going to approach this with love. I love my child. I want to be on their team. I want to do what I can. Right.
Hmm.
And the empathy is, yeah, this might be hard for you not to be on your screen all the time. And I get that too. The rules and the respect are probably two of the most important ones. So I always say, whenever there's something going on and you're frustrated and angry at your kids for doing it, I'm like, so what are your rules around that?
Hmm.
And often we don't have any rules. So it's really important to have the rules because that can be sort of a conversation ender. Well, that's our rule. That's just the way it is. It's not up for discussion right now. Not that rules can't change and we can be flexible. If your
Hmm.
kid is old enough, it's great to ask them to help you make the rules.
Hmm.
And that's a big part of the respect piece, too. All of this is very respectful, how we're speaking to them, understanding where they're coming from, asking them to help make the rules. Well, what do you think is reasonable? What's a reasonable amount of time? Hear what they have to say. Maybe it'll be more, maybe it'll be less than what you think, but you're now like involving them. They don't live in a prison, they're not being dictated to everything
Hmm.
that they have to do. And when we take this approach with everything, it really makes a difference. Your kid gets in trouble at school, the first thing we do is a kid comes home and says, my teacher was so mean to me today. He gave me detention. First thing we want to say is, what'd you do?
Right.
Right? Right? It's just, we just
How'd you
assume
screw
that it
up?
was,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So that's not great. Say, I can see how that made you feel. That sucks, honey.
Right.
Sometimes you don't even have to ask what happened. You just need to validate how they feel and give them a little love and support.
Yeah.
That's respectful. If they share with you what happened, instead of next time, I guess you won't, blah, 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 or
Hmm.
why don't you do this, or why didn't you just do that, all heard as judgment by our kids. Even
Hmm.
when we're offering up these suggestions with love, it's still that way. And we're also not helping our kids to become problem solvers when we
Hmm.
keep throwing out the suggestions. Then it's, honey, what do you think you might do differently next time?
Hmm. The agency
Get
thing.
them
Yeah.
to think about it. And we're not getting angry. We're not going to be punitive towards them. Not a fan of punishment
Hmm.
because I don't think it really gets to the core of the issue. The more we punish, the less we're going to hear from our kids about things that they've done. But if they
Hmm.
know that we're going to listen and talk about it in a loving, caring way, they're going to communicate with us.
Hmm.
Like, I'm going to lie and not tell you what happened if I'm going to get in trouble for it.
Right. Right. But if you're going to listen, yeah. Yeah. And going back to something you said about setting those rules, setting the framework for the kids, my background is different from yours, but I've come through sort of an ed tech background, educational technology, and so felt pretty comfortable setting those rules around technology with both my kids,
Mm-hmm.
and to the point of even doing a tech contract when we gave our older daughter a cell phone. And she has said that, I mean, she pushes back against the rules. Like, we have
It's
a
healthy.
hard, yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
She has a hard time limit, and in that time, we have a limit to what kinds of things she can use, and she can't install stuff that I haven't approved and all of that. And she has said on multiple occasions that she's really glad that she has that because a lot of her friends don't have those rules, and just are on the phone all the time, get sort of burnt out doing it. And she said, sometimes I don't want to have the limit, but I know it's good for me. So
That's
they're aware
awesome.
is kind of my point. They know that they
So
need that.
how does she monitor, or how do you monitor the time that she's on?
So, I mean, we're on Apple devices. We use the screen time feature, but then also if she's going to be doing something and wants to sort of create subsets of time, she wants to spend an hour on Roblox, but then she wants to do something with her friends, whatever, through FaceTime, then she'll set a timer and just know that I have X amount of time. So X minus the first part gives me the second part. And she just knows how to sort of monitor herself.
So that's amazing, and that's fantastic, because one of the things about that I feel strongly about, if you give your kids permission and the ability to be on screens, and if they're capable of doing screens, playing video games, whatever it is, they're also capable of learning to monitor their own time. And
Absolutely.
being this screen time warden is not in the book of parent responsibilities, and most parents take that on, and it sucks.
It is. It's really hard, and it's also so important because you see the sort of the pitfalls for people who have not grown up with those limits. All of a sudden, using the new technology, and you
Hmm.
see adults just buried in their phones, and it's because, in my mind at least, it's because they never had guidance around how to use it, and so this new stuff comes out, and it's fun to look at Reddit or Twitter or whatever, and you find that you've been scrolling for the last 6 hours. And
Doom
so
scrolling for the
the
last
doom
6 hours.
scrolling, right? And so I just feel like it's so important to set those rules for the kids. And I love that you've created this method of you come from a point of love. And I loved how you said that about thinking about how it was when your kid was born, because for me, that just took me right back to that point of, yeah, just utter devotion in a way that I had absolutely never felt before.
Hmm.
And just an incredible power of love that goes out the window when they start to drive you crazy. And I love that you're bringing people back to that. But then within that context, it's also, no, we've set these rules. This is not something that you're just going to be able to do because you want to. We can discuss it, which is something that we've done with both of my kids. They want more time. Okay, great. We'll have that conversation. But it's not just you can go do whatever you want. There are rules. We'll talk about the rules. We'll also understand where you're coming from and figure out a way through this together. And that just feels so healthy as a way to approach it.
Yeah, I think the last piece of that is, it's very easy to say, if you're on your screen too much, you're going to develop anxiety, right? And it's like drugs will kill you, right? And
Right.
everyone knows that all these statements are just too big and not true.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some might, but some won't. And so kind of want to say, what do you know about that? Have you heard that this has become a really big issue, that there's been studies done? Let's go on the computer and
Mm-hmm.
let's look up some of this stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
Again, really respectful, but saying, this is important information. Before I make a decision about this, I want to know, and I want you to be a part of this.
Yeah. And again, making them part of that thought process and not just laying down the law. Yeah.
Yeah, because the laying down the law is like, then they think we're being completely unreasonable. There's
Right.
no understanding, and I don't think we need to go into deep negotiations on every little thing with our kids. Sometimes a no is no, and I'm not discussing it. When it's things like this that are so important to our kids, I think it's really helpful to work through it together.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll also make us feel better and less anxious about the whole thing.
Yeah, well, and you said earlier that part of the reason that you're doing this as mentoring is that you're not a counselor, but a lot of what I'm hearing you say is the way that my wife is a psychologist. I think that the way that
Mm,
she approaches building sort of psychological change, helping people build that, it
mhm.
has to come from them. It can't be her saying, you're doing it wrong. Do it this way. It has to
Right.
come from them wanting to change. And you're essentially saying the same thing, whether or not you're a counselor. It sounds a lot like it.
Well, I'm not a
So what,
licensed counselor.
not a license, maybe.
Yeah.
We'll put that in the notes. So what
Yeah.
part in all of this, what part does the child play, and how responsible are they for the outcome when you're working with the parent? Just how much a part of that work is the child?
It's not. I focus really on the parent. It's funny. I've been approached by certain parents who want to send their kids to therapy and asking me if I know of someone. And I said, well, before you go that route, why don't you and I like have one or two sessions and let's just see, maybe you can make some changes at home that will avoid your child needing to go to therapy. And this has happened. A lot of the way we handle situations, the way we handle our kids' emotions can really help our kids. The way we structure things. You could be dealing with a 2 or a 3-year-old. They just need to get through their day. They're getting so much stimuli all day long. Just imagine. And I'll
Right.
also say, when someone's talking about their 3-year-old and complaining, I'm like, so think about this. Your child's been on this earth for only 3 years. 3 years. Like, think about 3 years in your life.
Right.
And look how much they've learned already. Look what they're capable of in 3 years.
Yeah.
Give them another 3 years and just see what's going to. You've got to let this processes evolve. It takes a long time for the brain to develop and for kids to learn things. And just because they can do this now doesn't mean you should have the expectations of them to behave in a certain way as a 3-year-old or
Right.
as a 13-year-old or even a 23-year-old.
Mm-hmm. You have people who are opting in, obviously. So people are choosing
Yeah.
to get your help on this. So you're not going to hopefully have people who are too resistant to this. But is that approach difficult for parents where you're not blaming them, but you're essentially saying that the change has to come from them when in their minds it's, why can't my 3-year-old act the way I want them to act? And I'm just curious, do people struggle with that idea, or is that just, does it become a no-brainer for them?
It becomes a no-brainer because they now have a different perspective. They have a different
Mm,
way of looking at it. Oh, yeah, they're only
mm,
3. Oh, yeah, this is hard for them. Oh, yeah, they can't transition from A to B that easily. So it's up to me to help them with the transitions. If your kid's going to a new school, you want to kind of swing by that school before they go. Show them where it is, show them what it looks like. Maybe they can
mm-hmm.
go into the classrooms, take a walk through the hallways, meet their teacher. As much prep as we can do, just so they know. A lot of times, parents will throw their kids into certain activities, and then they're like pissed off because their kids don't want to do it. And I spent the money and I signed them up, and they keep fighting with me. And I'm like,
This thing
okay,
I chose
well,
for them. Yeah.
yeah. So a lot of time, you can, if you want your kid to play little league or
Yeah.
t-ball or whatever, take them to see what it looks like. Just
Mm-hmm.
go hang out in the park. There's no need to be doing all this pushing and
Mm,
arguing. And so, like you said, what's the child have to do with this? If the child does say, oh, that looks really fun, I really want to do that, then you say, okay, we're going to sign you up. It's 12 weeks. Are you comfortable with that? When we sign up, or if you're joining this team, you're making a commitment to this.
right.
One day they're going to wake up and they're just not going to feel like it. And you know what? I know what that feels like. I'm sure you do too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we've all have that. Yeah, I signed up, but I just can't even deal with it today. So I'm not
Yep.
going,
I mean,
right? Like, we have to cut our kids slack too and not think
Mm-hmm.
if we let them off the hook that they're going to think that's the way it is all the time. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, we get so strict and dig our heels in so much when we're being unfair, I think. But
Yeah.
knowing ahead of time, hey, if they're like, I'm not really enjoying this anymore. Well, you made a commitment to your team. They're relying on you. But when the season's over, you don't have to do it again.
Yeah.
I get that it's not that much fun. I get that it's a drag for you to have to do this in the morning, but when it's over, you don't have to sign up again.
Mm-hmm. But you made the commitment. Let's do what you said you'd do.
I had a client who got up on a Saturday morning. She was sick. She had to drive her kid to a pitching workshop or whatever that she had signed up for. And it was like every
Mm-hmm.
week for 5 weeks or something. And it was far away. And her husband wasn't going to drive her. And she was like, no, she can't miss it. And so she's in the car and her daughter said, oh, this workshop is so boring.
Mm-hmm.
And her mom's reaction was, you're so ungrateful. I got out of bed to take you to this and you're complaining about it, which is,
Mm-hmm.
I get that. And I said, well, what did she actually say to you? She didn't say, I don't appreciate that you got out of bed when you're sick to drive me. She said, this is boring.
Mm-hmm.
And all the mom had to do was say, yeah, I can see that. It's pretty repetitive. Hopefully, it's going to make a difference in your pitching. But, if when this is over, you don't have to do it anymore. In fact, you don't even have to
Mm-hmm.
play softball anymore if you don't want. And the child would have been heard and understood and validated, and that would have been the end of it. Instead, they had a big argument about it.
Gives a lot
Mm-hmm.
of credence to the idea of take 3 breaths before you respond to anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
the
Which is hard.
respond instead
But
of
yeah.
respond instead of react.
Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
all right. This is don't want to hear that. Give yourself 3 breaths and then respond, and hopefully you're 10% better than the immediate snap reaction.
And for us to not take it personally, like most of the time when our kids say things, they're not saying them to us or at us. They're just saying it, and they want some emotional connection. They want to be understood. When we see little kids percolating, a lot of the time they're going to just explode and there's going to be a tantrum. And I've never met a parent who tells me that they haven't seen that. They know, oh my God, here it comes. So we have the ability to preempt that tantrum when we see that. We can just grab our kid and give him a really big hug and say, looks like you're having a really hard time right now. Come here.
Yeah.
Let me give you a really tight hug, sweetie. Done. Literally done.
Well, like you said, meeting them with empathy. Yeah. Part of your purpose here is to help our parents make children that are self-reliant and resilient and able to solve their own problems. And can you talk about how you've given some things, but are there specific ways, if you're thinking about building a self-reliant kid or a resilient child, are there specific things that you would want a parent to be doing?
Yes. Or not doing.
Or not doing,
And the
yes.
not doing is the fixing. Please, parents, stop fixing your kids' problems. You are not doing them any favors. Think about it. Ask yourself questions before you jump into fix. If I do this, am I helping my child to develop coping mechanisms? If I do this, am I helping my child to develop problem solving skills? Will my child become more self reliant? Do they have the opportunity to develop resiliency? And chances are the answers will always be no. And so the good news is all these things that are problems that you feel like you need to fix become opportunities for your child to learn all those things and develop these really important qualities that they need to go out into the world and deal with stuff. It's inevitable. Things are going to go wrong.
Yeah.
Things aren't going to feel so good sometimes. Instead of saying, I just want my kids to be happy, that we say, I want to know that my child knows how to handle being unhappy. I want to know that my child can handle being frustrated, angry, disappointed, worried. They can
Right.
handle uncomfortable feelings. So important. And
Yeah.
it's so hard as a parent to watch your kid be uncomfortable. Emotions are contagious. When someone's happy, it makes you happy. When your kid is smiling and laughing, oh, it feels so great as a parent. And when your
Hmm.
kid feels crappy and is sad about something, it
You want to
doesn't feel
fix it.
so good.
Yeah.
Right. So that they'll feel happy, so that
Right.
we'll feel happy. Right.
Right.
But if we can lose the weight of their emotions on our own shoulders and say, it's okay that my child is disappointed. It's important for them to feel this. I will be there to validate how they feel. I will be there to give them love and support through this, but I will not fix it. I'm going to allow my child to get through it.
Hmm.
And you know what? They will. And the next time they're disappointed about something, say, yeah, I know you're feeling. Remember that time when you didn't get invited to that party?
Hmm.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, because you got through it. Each little thing builds resiliency. But if you
Yeah.
don't have adversity, you can't become resilient. And
Yes.
adversity is so important.
Yeah. And I've seen that firsthand. My younger daughter, I guess she was about 5 when COVID started. And we moved out here where we live in the height of it in that summer of 2020. And we had this babysitter who was amazing. She loved her like a sister, like a mother, like just incredible relationship. But she lived in New York City, didn't want to do this for long. And so eventually she had to stop. And so then the kids are doing the virtual schooling experience, which was a difficult experience, and just she was really struggling. And I was working. I couldn't just take care of her all the time, but I would, sit next to her and be there with her and all of that stuff. She went from constantly needing my attention during that period, coming to me with everything, every little problem, to being able to solve problems on her own to the point that she now has an art table that we've set up. And this was a direct result of that experience, that adversity. She has this art table. She scavenges cardboard boxes. We get stuff online and she wants the cardboard box because she has a project that she's working on. We have no idea what the project is. And then all of a sudden she'll come down with this thing that she's created. And she's made out of this adversity. She's made this amazing sort of life for herself as a creator, as an inventor, as an architect, whatever she's going to end up being,
Awesome.
directly because of that adversity. So yeah, it really resonates for me.
And the next time something's difficult, you can remind her of that. At the
Hmm.
1 year anniversary of COVID, I'd been doing a lot of media at that time. And my message was, it's not something we want to necessarily celebrate, but I think it was worth acknowledging to everyone as a family. If someone told us a year ago and go through all the list of all the things that had just completely stopped that we couldn't do. You wouldn't see your
Hmm.
friends. You had to wash your food. Couldn't go to school. You had to do it online. Couldn't leave the house. Wear a mask. We would have said, no way. That's
Right, I can't survive
impossible.
that. Yeah.
And yet, look what we did. Look
Yeah.
what we all did together. Look how we managed living in the same house together.
Hmm.
And you managed learning and you managed this. And good for us and good for you. And you should feel really good about that.
Yeah. So I want to get into your book because these are the stuff that you're sharing is really terrific. But you have this book, Parenting with Sanity
Okay.
and Joy, and I
Yes.
would love to hear some favorite tips, and in particular, any of the tips that are counterintuitive. And I'll pull out one to start with that resonated for me, which was about when a child comes to you, if you're in the middle of something, if you're busy, and a child comes to you and says, hey, I want to do this. I want to go for a walk. I want to talk with you, whatever it is, that, we're all busy. Our reaction is, not right now, I'll get to you later. And the advice that you gave that really resonated, and I've actually used, is to validate the child's interest, and to not just say, I don't have time, or I'm busy, or wait a minute, or whatever, but it's to say, oh man, I really want to do that with you. I need to just finish this one thing really quick, and then we will do this. And that's shifted the way that I've interacted with particularly my younger kid, who's more likely to come to me wanting to do something in the middle of my workday.
Wait,
But
I'm
what
so glad that, yeah, I think you're referring to tip number 1, which is my
it might be.
favorite, which is say yes with joy.
Yeah.
And to just clarify, it doesn't mean say yes all the time.
Right.
It's say yes when you know you're going to say yes. When you know that you have to drive your kid somewhere, or you need to help them with a project, or even a little thing, that instead of doing the fine, I'll be there in a
Right.
minute.
Your
Oh,
watch.
you're
Yeah.
really, I'm so put out by this kind of
Right.
response. When you say, oh, sure, honey, I'd love to. Give me 5 minutes to finish what I'm doing. There is a switch that goes off in your head that makes you enjoy that thing. I'm so glad that you've implemented that. It really makes a huge difference. When I started
It
doing
did.
it,
Yeah.
it made a huge difference to me.
Yeah. No, it really did for me. It was almost like, it's as you've been saying, it's almost like an instantaneous change. It was this thing that was
Mm-hmm.
so small and so easy to do, and it made such a difference in the way that I interacted with her, because she'll just come barging in with something. I've got this thing I want you to see. I want to play we got one of the new Nintendo Switch games. I want to play the game. She comes in every day asking me to go play it with her for a little bit. And I'm in the middle of something, and I want to finish something. And it's so easy to be like, I'm busy. I'll do it later. But it made so much sense. The advice that you're giving of, no, the child wants your attention, wants your love, and you have that to give. And so just shift the way that you're responding, and it's still, I'll do it later if it has to be, but it's not go away. It's, I can't wait to do this thing with you as soon as I finish this other thing. And
Yeah.
that little shift was really, really amazing. So I started by asking you, what are your favorites? Then I told my favorite. But
Yeah,
so
that's
what?
okay. All right.
Where would you go
Well,
with that?
okay. Some of them are from my own experiences. So, like, your child is not a mini me. Hard for us. We want our kids to be us and like the things we do. And it can be very hard as a parent to accept the fact that you love this and your child doesn't. And I remember the moment where I realized that I used to love practicing the piano when I was a kid. And I would have to be told to stop. You have to do other things. You have to come up for dinner. And my daughter begged to play the piano, and she played and she took lessons, but it was like perfunctory practice. And I said, it doesn't seem like you're really enjoying. Don't you like practice? Because, Mom, I'm not you. Like, she actually said, Mom, I'm not you. And I'm like, you're right.
Yeah.
I like it, but not the way you did. And
Yeah.
she was pretty young when she said that.
That's
and
crazy.
I was like, yeah, it was crazy, but it was such a moment for me that it made me realize, you know what? Whether your child genetically or not, doesn't really matter. There's nature and nurture, but each person is so much their own person. Just take pleasure in the fact that you have the opportunity to watch another human being develop. With your love and your support, you're going to see how they find their own passions. And then maybe they get sick of them and they go on to something else. And that's also okay.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's one. Another one is let your kids order their own food in a restaurant. If your kid is 3 years old and can talk, there's no reason why they can't order their own food. They're telling you what they want. So why can't they
tell the waiter?
the waiter? And it also teaches them in a very safe, comfortable way how to learn to talk to other people that they don't know. You have the privilege of ordering your own food and you get to tell the person. So instead of, if you want to go, you have to. No, this is like a good thing. You get to do that. You're capable. I don't need to order. You're not a little baby. You can do it yourself.
Yeah.
It's a way to help our kids learn to start advocating for themselves, which I think is so important. When my kids were little and they wanted to borrow somebody's bucket on the beach, it was, you want to borrow it? Go ask them. I'll walk over with you if you want. But you got to ask. And then they didn't want to do it. I'm like, all right, fine. Guess you don't care that much. That's okay. That's all right. I don't really care. It wasn't important to me. And if it wasn't that important to you, then no, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I love that as sort of, because letting your kids order their own food in a restaurant is so specific, but that's not the point. It's let them act for themselves and learn how, which is so great. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess another one I really like is celebrate family milestones together. I remember when my daughter got her bed and my son jumped on it or whatever. We all sat, like, it was like we celebrated it together. So instead of her feeling like nobody gets to sit, get off my bed, it became like this special thing that we all were involved with. And if a kid loses a tooth or wins an award, instead of creating like jealousy amongst the kids, you get them to be supportive and loving. And it's a nice thing to do as a family. It's also one of those things that we don't necessarily think of. So that's like the tips in this book are like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. I can do that. Or, oh, yeah, that's a good reminder to me.
Well, there's small changes, like you said, but very impactful. So, okay, final question here is, to whatever degree you can share this, do you have an example that you can share of a memorable problem that a parent has brought to you and how you helped them and what the result was?
There was one where a mom was really like at her wit's end and she did want to send her child to therapy. He had really bad anger issues and he needed to go to physical therapy or occupational therapy every day. He couldn't go to the park after school like his friends, and he had to go do this instead. And then the littlest thing would just set him off. And when he was set off, he was really angry. And the poor mom didn't know like what to do, how to make him feel better, how to get this to stop. And she really thought he needed therapy. So I tried to help her with the perspective piece, the awareness piece. Think what he's going through. This poor little kid. Every day after school, he now has to go do something else, and which is work for him, and he doesn't get to play, and he's got this physical issue that he has to deal with. And think how hard that must be for him. And he probably can't really communicate. He doesn't have the vocabulary yet to really say, hey, mom, this is really a bummer that I have to go to physical therapy and I go to the park. And he doesn't know like how to get out those feelings. I said, you know what? This is very counterintuitive that when he starts throwing things and he starts getting so angry, like all you want to do is just say, go away and calm down. Right. I said, but if you take him, you kneel down and you hold him really tight. And there's research actually on a 20-second hug does the same thing as like some medications can actually. But if you hug him really tightly and just hold him and say, I know this is really hard for you. I know you're going through a hard time. Just give this a try. And if it doesn't work, then put him in therapy and bingo. She was like, oh my God, I can't believe what a difference this made. Because she made an emotional connection with him. He felt like my mom now gets how I feel. And I don't need to keep acting out that feeling because she gets it now.
Wow.
So I felt really good about that.
Yeah, I bet. That's a powerful story to end on.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And it feels like that's so emblematic of everything you've been talking about, just these little changes, little tweaks that you're bringing into the room that make a huge difference in very little interventions.
Yeah.
And it sounds amazing, some of the stuff that you're doing and the advice you're giving. It's just wonderful. I can see why people want to come to you for this. So Sue, thank you so much for joining. This was such a pleasure talking with you.
Same. It makes me happy to talk about this stuff. If I can help one of your listeners, that's awesome.
I'm sure it will. And we'll put the links to your website and to the book and all of that stuff, to the podcast, into the episode notes so that people can follow up and look more into this. But
and that social media stuff.
And social media, of course.
Yeah.
Yes. For now, folks, that's all. Thank you for listening, and always keep learning.
Did you learn something just now? Get the full episode of Ways We Learn wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, we'd love to get your rating or review.